I'm going to talk a little bit from a small business person's perspective on sort of our approach to prioritizing the good karma that comes with focusing on collaboration instead of sort of the negative energy that comes with focusing on competition. And I think so many folks in this room that might be in small business recognize that when you're a small business person, you're inevitably a David in an industry up against conglomerates that are giants, and you can't spend your energy focusing on competing with them because you'll never win. You need to find your niche and a way around them, and hopefully other folks that embrace what you're doing to help you find your way around them. So it'll be, instead of sort of naive of a small business person in an industry dominated by giants, instead of rose-colored glasses, I'll be looking through the lens of a golden beer that you got in front of you. The more you drink it, the more interesting this talk will be. But I will ask you to save a little bit for when we talk about this specific beer, but feel free to sip on it while I talk. So Dogfish had the dubious distinction of opening as the smallest commercial brewery in America when we opened 20 years ago in 1995. And I know you're not supposed to mention anyone in the room from a TED Talk because this is being broadcast everywhere, but we wouldn't exist if it weren't for then Governor Carper signing into law when a very scared 24-year-old man-child wrote legislation for the original brewpub statute. I say that because I'm very thankful to live and work in a state where our leaders really champion small businesses and the entrepreneurial spirit and ability to get to market. So we started as the smallest commercial brewery in the country. And in that era, there were about 600 breweries in America. And flash forward to today, we're now about the 14th largest craft brewery in America. There's now 3,200 small craft breweries in America. And I'm really proud of our growth that we've had. And I'm very thankful for my 230-odd coworkers who've joined me on this journey to make Dogfish relevant. And I often get asked, because I was an English major in college, I had dreams of writing the great American novel or short stories. And then I went to New York City and took writing courses after college. And to pay my bills, I worked at a first-generation beer bar on the Upper West Side and discovered Chimay and Sierra Nevada and fell in love with beer. Within weeks, started home brewing. Weeks after that, started writing my business plan. And my friends now are like, wow, that's amazing you'd be able to grow Dogfish, and you were a creative writer background, not a scientist or MBA or whatever. And I often say there's no greater example of a work of fiction than a business plan. You think about it, it's this thing, hey, bankers, I'm going to make this come true. Give me a couple $1 million. And it really is a work of fiction until you motivate a bunch of talented people with talents that complement yours to go on this journey with you and to collaborate to make this work of fiction into a reality. And that's really, how I recognize how lucky I am, is all these people that have joined Dogfish Head, my wife Mariah and I, on this journey to make it a reality. And the industry I work in itself is exemplary for its prioritization of collaboration, its altruism, its mutual support, because collectively the 3,200 small breweries in America share less than 10% market share. As much as you might hear about Sam Adams, and it seems ubiquitous, Sam Adams controls 1% domestic market share in America. The other biggest American-owned brewery, Yuengling, family-owned brewery up the road from us here, 1% market share. Two foreign conglomerates control over 80% domestic market share. So again, thinking collaboratively, the 3,200-odd craft breweries in America recognize that we have way more to gain standing shoulder to shoulder, and that rising tides float all ships. And we take opportunities to work with each other and to help each other. For example, at our brewery, when we outgrow a piece of equipment, we identify a brewery smaller than us that we really believe in and that we think is doing really great things in their community, and we reach out to them and say, hey, Allagash up in Maine, I know you guys are at the end of your capacity for your kegging equipment. We outgrew ours. We're going to sell it to you cheaper than used equipment value. If you've had Russian River beer in California, it was brewed in our old 50-barrel brew house that we sold to them cheaper than used equipment value, because we wanted to see them grow and love what they were doing up in the wine region to put beer on the map in the wine region. Most recently, John Harris, a great friend of ours, who was one of the real pioneers of the first generation Northwest craft brewing movement, left a pretty big brewery and didn't have really the money to start his own, so we sold him our original brew house for $1. He's like, I need to pay more for that for tax reasons, Sam. And I was like, no, I want to be able to say I sold you our brew house for $1. And I'm going out to brew a beer with him in Portland on that old brewing system in a couple months. So this spirit of altruism and collaboration is at the heart of the craft brewing movement. And the craft brewing movement is one of many industries at the heart of rejuvenate, whatever the word is, local businesses and downtown mom and pop businesses in America. Who would think that a manufacturing sector that represents the highest end of an industry, if you look at price points, is what's thriving in America when so many manufacturing jobs are going overseas? And us small breweries were blissfully inefficient. It takes way more of us to make a barrel of beer than the robots that make beer at the giant breweries. So that blissful inefficiency leads to so many jobs in the communities around the country. And now with 3,200 craft breweries in America and 1.5 new commercial breweries opening every day, every American can say we live within 10 miles of a local brewery. And these breweries are participating in the agricultural communities. Ed Key's become a great friend of mine as I'm sourcing local fruits and herbs and stuff to add to our beers and spirits, and those stories are being told in downtown America breweries every day. So I'm very fortunate to work in an industry based in agriculture and based in growing small town businesses across the country. Our business model was pretty unique in '95, a little less so now, but back then the first generation craft breweries that we loved and recognized as the real trailblazers, breweries like Sierra Nevada and Sam Adams, were making really great from scratch, unpasteurized, all natural, intensely flavorful beers, but in general they were referencing existing European beer styles. Sierra Nevada referencing English ales, Sam Adams Brewery referencing German lagers. So I knew as a 24-year-old guy who raised about $220,000 to start a company, we wouldn't be able to compete, and again, we didn't want to compete with them and their business model. So we tried to find a niche that was complementary and different from what they were doing. So that got me researching the early American artisanal food movement, people like Alice Waters in California at Chez Panisse and James Beard, the great culinary evangelist here on the East Coast, with similar messages, which was we need to stop genuflecting towards Europe and their culinary traditions because we grow amazing things. We have a bountiful natural agricultural community here in America, so let's create our own cuisine, around what we're good at growing here in America. So for Dogfish, that was our mission, was to be the first American craft brewery focused on looking at the entire culinary landscape for potential ingredients instead of just looking at European traditional beer style ingredients. And we took some abuse for that when you opened in 1995 with beers like Raison d'Etre, made with raisins and beet sugars, and Chicory Stout, made with coffee and licorice, and St. John's Wort, which made it the world's only antidepressant depressant. Canceled itself out. You couldn't feel anything after drinking it. But I would go to beer festivals in the late 90s, and some hardcore beer enthusiasts and other brewers would come up and say, Sam, what'd you put in your beer today? You got raisins in there? That's really disrespectful to the tradition of brewing, And they would get mad at me about it. So that got me researching what this traditional people were talking about meant. And whether consciously or unconsciously, this concept of traditional brewing, commercial brewing around the world, is referencing this thing called the Reinheitsgebot, which is the Bavarian Beer Purity Act of 1516, where the Bavarian government pretty much mandated beer could only be made with water, hops, and barley. And yeast had yet to be discovered under a microscope by Louis Pasteur, so that was kind of a given. And by and large, within centuries, the rest of the world genuflected to this definition of what beer should be. And so I started researching, well, what was beer like before the Reinheitsgebot? And I started brewing things like Tej, which is the national beer of Ethiopia, made with honey and bittered with geisha root, a tree root, because hops don't grow in that warm environment. Or I brew a Bragote, which is a medieval English hybrid of a beer, a mead, and a fruit beverage. And then I brought these beverages to a festival down the road from here at University of Pennsylvania that just happened to have in the bowels of that museum the world's foremost expert on ancient fermented beverages, this guy named Dr. Pat McGovern, who's a molecular archaeologist by trade. And with the advances in science, now they can analyze residue found on crockery in these ancient tombs. So the University of Pennsylvania archaeologists in the 1950s harvested this tomb or participated in excavating a tomb in Turkey believed to belong to King Midas. And the first thing they noticed when they opened the tomb walls was all the light left the room because the tapestries hadn't been exposed to air in hundreds of years, thousands of years. So that left the room, all the color left the room before their eyes. And then they noticed how bad the room smelled. And the legend of Midas turned out to not be so true. There wasn't a bunch of gold in there. There was like an ornate funeral bed with the remains of the king on the bed. And then the thing that smelt that they took back to Pennsylvania and could analyze many decades later was the remains of the funerary feast, which was this lamb stew and this beverage, the residue, that had evidence of honey and grapes and saffron in it. And so they came to us because we were brewing these experimental historic beers to prove that culinary ingredients should go into beer as they used to. And we recreated this Midas Touch beer, and it's become our most award-winning beer at our company. And then soon on the heels of that, we did the beer that you have in front of you. I hope there's some left, and have a sip. I need one right now. Which is called Chateau Jiahu, and Jiahu is the name of an area in China. What you're drinking right now is of historic importance. It's the oldest known fermented beverage in the history of mankind. So wine can, whatever. Because before the discovery of this tomb, wine had the oldest known finding. But this Jiahu dig site in China was really significant because it's from 7,000 BC, so it's 9,000 years old, and it moved back the history of beer, which before that was in Iran, from 2,000 years younger. So the Near East had the record for oldest beer, and now with this discovery, it was the Far East. But tremendously more interesting was that also in this tomb was not only the oldest known fermented beverage made from hawthorn fruit, which is kind of like pomegranate, I think, sake yeast, sake rice, honey. But the tomb also had the oldest playable musical instruments, which were these hollowed out bird bones that actually were calibrated on modern musical notes, 9,000 years old. So they're having a hootenanny the night of this festival, playing music, collaborating with each other, and drinking an ancient beverage. Most significantly, this era of 9,000 years ago coincides with the moment when human beings shifted from hunting and gathering individual, whatever that word is, nomads, competing with each other for their next meal, to settling down in villages to raise crops, to domesticate animals. And there's no proof that this was done for bread instead of beer. The era coincides with each other. I was lucky enough to brew in Egypt a few years ago and got to go in the Tomb of Tay outside of Cairo, where it's the earliest human artistic depiction of my craft, a brewer's craft. And one glyph, one symbol, represents both beer and bread in their language. So beer is responsible for civilization as we know it. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. That's an example of a backwards-looking collaboration that we've been really proud to do that celebrates, how interwoven the history of beer is with the history of civilization and with prioritizing nature. So many of the places I've got to brew ancient beers, Peru, Mexico, Egypt, that we think we created that moment where we dump a little beer out for our homies and our lost ancestors. Almost every culture has that moment where before you drink or sometime during their rituals of the night, they're dumping a little bit back into the earth, the source that gave them their sustenance. In the case of breweries like ours, the source that gives us our livelihood. So it's pretty neat to think as modern brewers, we're part of that tradition. And part of that tradition is about conserving the natural things that we make our livelihood with. So in the case of our brewery, it took us numerous years to get to profitability because we were brewing beers that pretty much nobody wanted in the 90s. And then soon after, things like Midas Touch happened, and People Magazine did a thing on it, the Today Show did a thing on it. We started to get recognition for brewing outside of these stylistic guidelines and grow a cult following nationally and soon internationally as well. And the first thing we did once we hit profitability was try to find leaders to come to our company who had hats that fit them well at our company. As starting up entrepreneurs, you wear a lot of hats and not all of them fit you well. So the first thing you gotta do is find people who the hats fit better on for the parts of the job you suck at. So that was the first thing we did, motivated a bunch of talented people to join us on our journey. But the second thing we did was start up Beer and Benevolence, which is the nonprofit part of our company. And we've been very thoughtful since day one. My wife Mariah and Mark run that program for us. We've been very thoughtful on where our money should go. Certainly if it's a small donation like the beers you're having tonight, we will entertain any worthy cause. But in terms of putting thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars towards specific causes, we're pretty discerning, and they have to match the mission of our company. So one of them is Habitat for Humanity, where because we're a brewery with 200 people and we have an engineering department and maintenance department, we have an awesome set of tools. So we can shut down our locations for a day and coordinate builds on our own facility site, where in one day we can bang out 2 houses for underprivileged people in Sussex County to have their own house. And not only that, it's not pure altruism, because we'll team up someone from the maintenance department who's awesome with a power tool with someone like me who's pretty good with a computer but not a power tool, with one of our waitresses, one of our forklift drivers. And we build teams from different departments of people that don't usually get to interact with each other, and we collaborate with each other to give back to the community, but we also learn more about each other and about our company by taking moments like that. But far and away, the largest nonprofit partner that we do have is the Delaware chapter of the Nature Conservancy. I'm very proud of my wife, Mariah, who runs Dogfish alongside of me, and her work with that organization. But talk about an overlap of missions. You know, everything that our company makes, from food to spirits to beer, pretty much wouldn't exist if there wasn't a sustained effort to conserve our natural resources. So it's a no-brainer in terms of mission alignment for Dogfish Head and the Nature Conservancy. By far, our biggest annual event that we do together is something called the Dogfish Dash. I'd invite you to come down this year, but I think it's already sold out. I think it sells out in a few minutes online, so you got to sign up fast and go to dogfish.com to figure out where and when it happens. But it's thousands of beer and running lovers who come to beautiful Milton, Delaware, and run either a 5 or 10K race past some of the lands that the Nature Conservancy preserves in our hometown of Milton. But last year, we were opening an inn right on the harbor in Lewis, the town that I live in, which is equidistant between our production brewery in Milton and our restaurant distillery brewery in downtown Rehoboth. And you can paddleboard or bike in pretty much equal time to either location. So we bought this inn without knowing anything about how to run a hotel. Called the Buccinis. They said, "Yeah, sure, we'll try and help you. We'll see what happens." And we get into business, and I think, well, maybe the best thing we can do is show the other cities around us how close we are to them, because a lot of the northern cities that brag about how cool their beach towns are, the Hamptons and Cape Cod, haven't seen how great coastal Delaware is, and the fact that we have these amazing shoulder seasons where you can hang out on a beach in June or September, and you can't do that in Nantucket. So I decided that I would take a little 18-foot Boston whaler from Dogfish Head, Delaware, in front of our inn, to the place where I grew up, Dogfish Head, Maine, which is near Booth Bay Harbor. And I convinced or cajoled my 15-year-old son to join me on this journey. Again, not all altruism. He had nowhere to go and had to talk to me for eight days, which anyone with teenagers knows an interesting dynamic. So he prepped and learned how to run the GPS and the stereo, which is what he was most excited about. And I focused on driving up the East Coast. But how we planned that trip, which we called a movable feast, was to say, if we're going to do this and show how close we are to these cities, let's do it with our number one partner in our number one mission that we care most about, in preserving and conserving natural lands where our ingredients grow and where people visit us at the beach. So we coordinated with the local chapters of the Nature Conservancy in 5 states, and we took this little boat and did a beer dinner in Atlantic City. We did them in then Manhattan, and then we took the little boat to Block Island, Rhode Island, Boston, Mass., and Portland, Maine, and did these series of dinners and got to hear about the different but similar challenges of each of the local chapters of the Nature Conservancy, and got to really understand the sort of micro-environmental issues that were nuanced and a little bit different for each of those regions. And we got to raise awareness for our inn. Again, as a business person, it wasn't all altruism, but we also got to raise great awareness for the causes of each chapter of the Nature Conservancy. And we raised money for them as well. And I had an existential moment coming into New York Harbor, scared I was going to get run over by one of those crazy water taxis. And I'm like, all right, Sammy, focus on that, but also can you start looking for the Statue of Liberty? We got to be close. We got to be close. And I thought for a moment, like, holy crap, Sam, think about this. This is what my grandfather Mastriani on my mother's side was probably feeling the same thing as he came into Ellis Island. Like, holy crap, let's look for the Statue of Liberty. And I was like talking to my son while I'm doing this about, this is the American dream, and this is amazing, and we're sustaining the American dream for future generations by doing our job to preserve. And I gave him the spiel, and I'll never forget, he looked at me and said, please, shut up, I'm trying to listen to the song. But later that night, we did the dinner, and he listened to the messages and was pretty impressed with the little journey that we were on. And there have been other opportunities that we've done inside of our industry, collaborating with breweries like Sierra Nevada on a beer called Life and Limb with maple syrup from my family's farm up in New England, and the Grossman family farms grain from California. And Saison de Buff from Victory Brewing Company, I'm wearing their socks, right down the road in downtown Pennsylvania, in Stone, where we brew beer with local herbs, parsley, sage, rosemary, and thyme, because we're music geeks. And we grow them with herbs that are from our communities. So it's a local terroir that we're celebrating while we're brewing this beer in 3 different states. But these are all really just examples of opportunities that any small business has to, once you get to a point of profitability, that commitment, that obligation to align human resources, whether they're economic or political or scientific, and align them with natural resources. We have a commitment to do it, and there's amazing karma when we come together and collaborate and do that. So thank you guys for your time. Cheers.